Leo, just wait a second. If we start, we will let in about 23, 24 people in the waiting room. And then if they are in, then you can start. Sorry for interrupt you.
No, it's perfect. Thank you, Cristina.
Leo, también vamos a hacer la conexión para la transmisión. Ustedes ya están transmitiendo. Ok, ya está, listo.
¿Qué traducciones tenemos?
Michael.
De traducciones, en el momento tenemos creo que 6 personas. Elena, de inglés a español. Camila, de inglés a español. Anouk, de portugués a español. Charlotte, portugués a inglés. Lisa, inglés a francés. Y, perdón, son 2 más. Natalia, inglés a español también. Y Julia, portugués a francés.
And Leo Socorro Gomez is in. Leo Socorro Gomez is with us.
Great.
Buenos dias.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Obrigada. Bom dia.
Hello.
Alô, como está? Companheiro Léo, como está?
Bien. No le veo.
Não sei o que há, vou a ver. Isso.
Ahora, su nome. Es en paso a la izquierda. Al lado del micrófono.
Sim, estou a ver. Vou tirar esse. Deixa esse. Agora. Bom, vou tirar esse.
Perfecto.
Não. Agora. Buenos dias.
Buenos días. Cristina, you're going to tell me when the 23...
Yes, now you can.
Now I can, what? Can I start?
You can start now, yes.
Okay. Well, welcome in the context of the World Social Forum, which, as you know, is should have taken place in Mexico, but unfortunately circumstances don't allow that. You know all what I'm referring to. But we are, to say, using crisis as a chance to learn a lot about communications, and that's why we had this try to make it in a virtual form. The political context in many meetings we have had with larger organizations, smaller organizations, this was a process of several months. It turned out that we want to get the movements together, and that would imply also a different identity of the World Social Forum, which has been traditionally a meeting ground of exchange and networking and so on. But finally, it did not go beyond that, what everybody in his and her life is doing anyway. Now we want to make it different and have a try to, when I was 25 years old, which was some time ago, I wrote an article under the title, Bringing the Revolution Together. And that reminds me of these efforts we had in the aftermath of 1968. And from the perspective of the peace movement, this means that also the peace movement should enlarge, not only within process of inner growth, but enlarge also in giving an identity of peaceful actions to other parts of the movement, like the ecology movement, like the social movement and the human rights movement, and so on. That is very easy to say, but quite a challenge to do and to realize. And this panel is thought of being one of the central panels to sort out how this identity could be done. Of course, we express our solidarity always with each other, but it should also be a matter of content. Perhaps sometimes we have to modify something in order with this objective of enlarging. And this panel in particular, and that I'm very happy that it came off the ground, is really a distinguished panel in every sense of the word, where from different sides you could express yourself. What would be the idea in order to make an axe between peace and environment, between social and peace, and so on, under the perspective of the peace movement. And we are going to have first the individual interventions. We said that perhaps you should not be longer than 7, maximum 8 minutes each, because the real core should also have some room. The core is how can we design afterwards a common strategy, starting with the inputs you have. But tomorrow we are going to have in the World Social Forum an important panel also about the transformation of the World Social Forum in the sense I just tried to outline. And on Saturday and Sunday you would be welcome to participate in our effort to make an assembly to where all of these movements should converge. This is the idea, but it needs some work, and you are very welcome and invited to participate in this common work. As a first speaker, I want to present Binalakshmi Nepram. We are always referring Bina, that is more easier for us, from India, representing the Manipur women gun survivors, and you are part of the board of the International Peace Bureau. I just was listening to one of your speeches in the other panel, and one sentence got very, very deeply registered in my head, which you said that if Mahatma Gandhi would be alive, he would turn around or fight or whatever against the present government of India. But the important thing is that we keep struggling. So please go ahead, Bina.
Thank you very much. I pay my obeisance in my native indigenous language, Mayambu Taramna Okchari. My name is Bina Nepram, and I am from the state of Manipur in northeast of India. This is an indigenous state which was annexed by India in the year 1949. And since then, we have been under martial law. More than 50,000 people have died in our region. We have more than 300,000 troops. So I come from that region, which is one of the world's most militarized zones. But like many conflicts in the world, which are not known and reported, the Manipur conflict is an issue which the world is yet to know. So I come in the field of disarmament from this particular angle. But first of all, at this particular moment in history, we are convening, united in grief because of what's happening with COVID. 96 million people are infected and 2 million have died in this pandemic. But I'm thankful to the World Social Forum and International Peace Bureau for convening the first historic peace day in the history of World Social Forum. I did attend the World Social Forum in Mumbai in the early 2000 at that time. So right now, what is happening is we are living in a world where, as I mentioned, more than 96 million people are to go into extreme poverty because of this COVID. We need to understand this context to be able to build in. The other thing is, because of COVID, the impact on social, there is 14 years backsliding in democracy because of COVID. 161 countries have closed their borders or partially closed. So the world is not becoming united. The world is actually become so divided with this. But again, the good thing is, like the convenings like this, we try to find spaces to continue the connect. More than 78 million people are displaced worldwide currently, and more than 500 million people have become jobless since the start of COVID-19. And many areas like Manipur in northeast of India continue to live under martial law. So this is the context that we come from. Again, as Leo mentioned, India, where I come from, land of Gandhi, the land which gave yoga to the world, is not the India that we recognize. What is happening here? Did you know that after United States and China, India is the third largest military spender in the world and second highest importer of armaments after Saudi Arabia? This is of a country which still have 500 to 800 million poor, and millions have got poor because of the last 1 year. Currently, just a few days back, the world celebrated the nuclear weapons treaty. India still has 130 to 140 nuclear warheads. And last couple of years, we had, since Prime Minister Modi's time, 6% increase in the military budget of our country. Now, look at the dichotomy on how it's impacting the others. On one hand, we are becoming in top number 1, 2, 3 in military expenditure and imports. We are 112 in the World Global Gender Index. For every 22 minutes, a girl, a child as young as 2 months to 7 years are raped in the streets, in the homes, in the public spaces of India. We are world number 4 in the Global Hunger Index, and we are number 80 in the World Corruption Index. So this is one thing, and India plans to increase its defense market to 620 billion by next year. So this is the level of how militarization is happening. Again, that's why Leo mentioned that Mahatma Gandhi would be turning in his grave now. The ones who killed him are the ones who are ruling India right now. So this is what we have to really understand. And India is expanding its military bases. It's not America alone. In Tajikistan, Bhutan, Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Oman. Recently, the UN lauded India for giving COVID vaccines to Mauritius. But on the other hand, it's also making Mauritius as a military base of India, which is the world's largest emerging economy. But this was not the story of India 50 years ago. In fact, India championed peace, disarmament, and development at the time of independence. India championed the cause of non-aligned movement. But it changed over the years. We have the most right-wing government where freedom of expression, and India was the country in the last couple of years with the highest number of internet bans. Anytime someone protests, freedom of expression has been heard. So this is what is happening. But in terms of the global trends in militarization and how that is hurting our environment, how it's hurting, let's see. Everyone knows, and this whole day panel would have told you, $1.9 trillion US spent every year. We know this, but then how does it translate into impacting? 300 billion needed for climate change. And just a mere, which is, if this is 60 million, like for every 60 days, the military spending of every 60 days is the amount of money that is needed for climate change. But yet that money is not yet found. And then 175 billion needed to fight poverty, to ensure that everyone has a right to life, dignity, food, job, and not to be homeless. 175 billion needed for fighting poverty. What is that? That is only 4 times military budget of the United States government. So this is the way in which we have done. So something is not working. I have been in the field of disarmament for the last 15 years of my life. I always say since the day I was born in a time of military curfew. I was born at a time of martial law in my part of the world. And yet, when we ask for the safety and security of every woman, child, person, we are told that don't ask questions about military spending. That's national security. We pay our taxes, but we are not allowed to ask questions. So what does national security means for many, many parts of our world? Because in the name of fighting terrorism, in the name of fighting all of this, all the threats, citizens are made to pay, whereas we are not getting secure. The United Nations, which many of us are involved with, also knows that the Charter says there should be least diversion of armaments from the resources, human economic resources of the world. Is this happening? No. The permanent 5 members of the United Nations Security Council produces 88% of the world's weapons. I repeat, the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council produces 88% of the world's weapons. And it is these weapons which are flooding many countries in the global south. For every $1 worth of aid the developed world goes to the developing world, they make us buy $10 worth of their weapons. This is a reality which we need to challenge. Hence, I love the title of our panel today, Universal Disarmament. And my last point is, how do we do it? How do we do it? And the good news is this. We, the indigenous women of Manipur and northeast of India, together with friends from India, started India's first disarmament movement by founding the Control Arms Foundation of India. We are working with parliamentarians, we are writing research papers, we're advocating to make disarmament meaningful to the lives of land which Gandhi was born and the land which gave non-violence to the world. But this is a very, very different. We are called anti-national many times for asking for the removal of the martial law. We are called anti-national for asking questions on India's defense budget. This is the level of threats that we have faced many, many times. The other point is, how do we do it? We need to get indigenous people, because many indigenous lands, just like Manipur, are heavily militarized. So we need to involve women, very important, 50%. We have 17 peace talks in India's northeast, and not a single woman is included. How can you talk about universal disarmament when half the population of the world are excluded? Number 2, why indigenous? Because indigenous territories are used as nuclear testing sites. This morning, former Ambassador Ainsa Khan from Mongolia said 504 nuclear tests was done in Mongolia. That shocked me. So toxic waste dumps into the sites of indigenous people. So we got to involve indigenous population in this. The number 3, we in Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network, as well as the Northeast Initiative for Peace, we have started a concept what is called household disarmament. Disarmament usually used where it is home-based, because I have been a part of many negotiation treaties like Arms Trade Treaty, ammunition on a cluster ammunition treaty, and also I was there when the Nuclear Ban Treaty was adopted at the UN. These are very important treaties and we celebrate that, but these are on paper. We need to translate many of the disarmament treaties. We have to join the intersection. We cannot work in silos. Universal disarmament needs to be holistically woven, intersectionally, and also intergenerational. So once I taught a course called Women, War, and Peace, and I taught a paper called Militarizing a Can of Soup. The concept of militarization, which is now films, when an AK-47 is wiped out, or where there's always a valorization of patriarchy, militarization, racism. All of these are linked, and we got to really investigate those. The military-industrial complex, in my third point, should be dismantled. There is, in India, government is acting as the representative of the neoliberal economy, and that is not right. Government should be of the people, by the people, and it's not working. The other thing, we the citizens pay taxes. We should know where our money is going. And to do that, we till now, in spite of years and decades of disarmament, we haven't met the dent. And that's why in India, we're going to start and only start the process of putting pressure on our members of parliament to ensure that our money that we are giving is invested for peace and not war. What is interesting, that 1 year of military budget is equal to 650 years of the UN budget. Can you imagine? Or just 1 year of military budget spent by all the nations of the world could fund 6,300 years of UN women's work on gender equality. And if you reduce 6% of the military industrial military expenditure, you could actually make sustainable development goal happen. And my last point is this. Universal disarmament cannot be a project. We cannot stop when the funding stops. It should be a commitment of a lifetime. I, for one, have committed, and it has to be done not as a project base, but even if there are no funding for us, we should continue this. As I mentioned, we should ask, and UN Secretary General has, during this time, started this ceasefire during COVID-19. We should prevail upon the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council to reduce military budget by 10% so that they could fund and ensure that climate change, social justice programs could be made. And finally, as I would like to quote IPP co-president Reiner Philip, when he said, the world needs a new social contract. Peace movement, ecological movement, labor movement, women's movement need to unite, indigenous women need to unite in the pursuit of an alternative sense of development. And finally, Dan Smith of CIPRI also mentioned once at one of our IPP panels, ordinary people responding to extraordinary situation. This is the need of the hour. Universal disarmament has to include thousands and millions of people whose names are not heard, who are defending rights. A couple of years ago, 2019, 300 human rights defenders died in protecting our rights, protecting our environment. We must ensure that the ordinary people who are doing work, they should be given a place under the sun to be able to say what they want. And finally, my statement is to those warmongers, to those politicians who are creating divide, our quest for peace is greater than your thirst for war. Long live global solidarity. Yam Nungaijare.
Thank you very, very much, Bina, for this really impressive statement, which covers all in a sort of also emotional depth according to the situation. If we try now to translate this purpose you just outlined into a strategical way, what we could do and how could we fit in as a peace movement in the whole process of this extreme crisis we are living in. I want to ask Reiner Braun, who is not only a very good personal friend, but also a political friend. Although I'm a social anthropologist and we come from different sides, we have found each other since many, many years. And I ask you the question, what to do? Unmute.
Thank you, Leo, for this nice introduction. And thank you, Bina, for this brilliant first speech, because it allows me to start with a question. And I think you gave part of the answer to the questions. Why do we need a big transformation? Let me remember only some figures of the need. The world is spending $2 trillion every year for military purposes. We're living in a world with 36 wars and 200 violent military conflicts. Bina described some of them. We have in this world 14,000 nuclear weapons, and even a small amount of these nuclear weapons can destroy the civilization on the earth anytime. In the same short time I'm speaking, 10,000 children died of hunger. We have the climate disaster, which slowly is burning the world. We have 1 billion people which are going with hunger to bed. And according to the ILO figures, we have 200 million people without work. And the pandemic exacerbates all these problems. Now, this is the one side of the coin. The other side is that the rich become even richer. The 200 wealthiest people have money from $10.3 trillion. And they got 2 trillion more during the pandemic time. And the shares of the arms companies, even in the pandemic time, were rising by 30%. This is a picture of the world. And this shows that a fundamental social, ecological, and peace transformation is the imperative and the challenge if humanity and nature will survive. This transformation is more than a redistribution. It requires new forms of ownership, global justice, peace with nature, a new environmentally friendly lifestyle, global peace, and an end to a system of exploitation and plunder based on economic growth, consumerism, and imperialism. The transformation is dialectic in the deepest sense. Without peace, there can be no social ecological transformation. Or can anyone imagine a society and future with social justice, global security, and ecological transformation, with wars and armed conflicts, with spending of billions for armament, with killing day-to-day people, killing and social justice on the same way? No. Global justice and environmental transformation is dispensably require peace and disarmament. Disarmament because we need the money for social and climate issues, and no cooperative solution for the future is, you can imagine, in a confrontational world of high armament. Sustainable and responsible use of resources is only possible in peace and without disarmament. Do you know how much resources we are spending day to day for tanks, aircrafts, and for wars? Gigantic emissions of every tank and aircraft have to overcome when we really want to earn peace. So there will be no transformation without peace and disarmament. But vice versa, there will be also no peace without social and climate justice, without protection of the environment and resources. Social injustice, environmental conflicts, and climate disasters are always causes of war. The warmongers in politics and government are also always the ones responsible for social injustice and environmental disaster. Or in other words, can anyone imagine peace in the world when more and more areas of the world are being burned, built up, plundered, when there is a lack of water, drugs, destruction of diversity, when flight and impulsive increase, when the earth becomes more and more uninhabitable? Can anyone imagine peace when injustice between and within nations continue to increase and exploitation of entire continents is a defining element? No. Peace requires justice and environmental preservation, and justice and environment can only exist in peace. Therefore, the transformation we are speaking about can only be a social, ecological peace transformation. Whoever takes one of these elements away, he will destroy the whole transformation. And this transformation is the challenges of the 21st century. And it requires specific points. It requires the dismantling of militarism as a socially destructive phenomenon, which also means the end of the arms industry through a gigantic conversion process to civilian peaceful industry. It requires a fundamental democratization of society, participation, and emancipation. It requires common goods instead of big corporations, social production and planning instead of senseless consumerism and insane exploitation of resources. It requires a society based on solidarity that overcomes competitiveness, a zero-sum mentality, and the economization of the environment in all parts of the society. And it requires the end of stupid economic growth society, first in the capitalist countries responsible for the catastrophic dynamic, but not only in these countries. Therefore, neither the Green New Deal of the European Union nor the first Biden reflections are great transformation strategies. They are only green kitsch for an outdated growth model of profit distribution to greenwashing capitalism and will not solve any problems. And this greenwashing capitalism also includes militarism and wars. Great transformation is a social task for us as social movement, and especially for trade unions, environmental movement, and peace movement. Only together can we develop the charisma and the power that is necessary to implement this transformation and to win other allies and further forces to fight with us. We are facing the challenges right now as we fight the pandemic, and we want to open new doors and see new opportunities. Build back better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reiner, for pointing out and articulating that wars and militarism doesn't only affect those who are directly involved, the victims, but in some way the whole world is becoming a victim, the whole system. And that's why we are going since several years, starting with the climate movement, which said Via Campesina, I remember in Cancun, changed, don't change the climate, change the system. It's really a system change which is required according to this. And for that, we need big supports from the organized people above all. And one of the most organized frameworks existing in the world are the trade unions. And that's why I'm particularly happy that the Vice Secretary General of the International Trade Union is with us, Mr. Owen Tudor, and I'm very happy to welcome you also as a comrade of civil society, like we are all here in the World Social Forum. Owen, you take the floor.
Thanks very much. And I'm honored to share this platform with so many good and distinguished people, all of whom I think are going to be saying to you roughly the same thing in
Je suis
slightly different
contente
ways.
de partager avec vous
My name
et
is
vous
Owen
annoncer le
Tudor,
discours.
Deputy General Secretary of the
Je vais parler
International Trade Union Confederation, representing 200 million trade union members, working women and men in 164 countries and territories around the world. If we were a sovereign state, we would be the 7th biggest, bigger than any country in Africa or Europe. So we have a big stake in the future of the planet and the people who live on it. Nuclear weapons represent an existential threat. War feeds off and creates destitution, death, and dictatorship. And the cost to the global economy of $1.9 trillion a year spent on arms is catastrophic, especially when we need that money for quality health services for all, free at the point of need. For proper childcare and aged care from cradle to grave, with as much time in between spent in health, wealth, and happiness. Universal social protection for when the worst happens, sickness, unemployment, poverty. Access to clean water and sanitation. A just transition to a carbon neutral economy. And decent jobs. All that requires, as I was glad to hear Bina say, a new social contract based on a universal labour floor of rights at work for everyone, a fair tax system, and properly funded public services. The peace dividend that we've been promised before and would come from scrapping and converting nuclear weapons in particular could pay for a global fund for social protection for the poorest in our societies, minimum living wages and decent work for everyone, and quality jobs, including that use the skills currently applied to weapons of war, from research through manufacture to deployment, on socially useful work with unions involved in any arms conversion arrangements. Above all, we need to free people from the poisonous umbrella of nuclear weapons and mutually assured destruction. We must win support for and implement common security instead, based on international solidarity, strong and inclusive multilateral institutions, and mutual respect. Trade unions welcomed the coming into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons on Friday, which is why nuclear weapons are highest in my thoughts today. We will continue to press for more governments to sign up before the first conference of countries later this year. And if we reached 50 signatories by the end of last year, let's set a target to get 100 signed up by the end of this one. That treaty builds on and in no way contradicts the earlier Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, which we also support and want strengthened. Working people will work in their unions with the peace movement, with green groups, and with the women's movement everywhere to establish a nuclear-free Europe and a nuclear-free, socially just world. As we struggle with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are extremely concerned about the prospects of a deep recession and economic slowdown and the tensions it will generate in and between nations. In such a volatile security context, the risk of the use of nuclear weapons becomes all the more imminent. Nuclear weapons need to be banned urgently, but common security requires more than military defense. Lasting peace can only be built on social justice and democracy. As well as the COVID-19 pandemic, we face glaring inequalities, a failure of democratic legitimacy in too many countries, and a climate emergency. Against that backdrop, we are concerned about a new nuclear and conventional arms race at a time when the world is in dire need of investment in green and decent jobs, social protection, education, and care. We need a new social contract for the world. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Owen, for pointing out that also there is the economic side of when everything gets concentrated on military race. There is nothing anymore for a social binding of the people and for the society at large. And that's why the different other movements should get into the boat, because if not, this will be drowned. I want to take up another aspect of the same coin, which is the aspect of ecology, because peace is not only a value for social society, for societies at large, but also for the whole planet. So I want to ask Alexander Arch, who is from the Institute of Research on Global Change, and also part, he has come to us several times, of our network, which is the network Prague Spring 2 against far-right extremism and populism. Alexander.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for your invitation for this wonderful panel. So I will try to give you a little bit of climate change perspective on emissions and military. So several of you have already said some numbers. So there is a recent report that says global military is responsible for somewhere between 1 to 5 global emissions in terms of percentage. That is almost 2 times larger than aircraft industry. So, and it's comparable to big countries such as Germany or France or United Kingdom. So definitely there is a significant contribution of carbon emissions from military alone. And this is of course interconnected to other activities. I guess I don't have to tell you that there is a clear link between the amount of military spending, the amount of democracy, amount of inequality, amount of social justice, and all these negative social indicators. I guess you probably know one of the very few countries in the world that has no military spending is Costa Rica. And this country as well is one of the very few countries that is relatively close to the 2 degrees limit of warming limit that was set by Paris Agreement. So what we need, and I always tell it when I present the climate change and emissions problem, I always say we cannot solve this problem without addressing the military spending, addressing the affairs related to peace and other related things. The current situation is that we have already reached 1.2 degrees of global warming. So we are very close to the first limit of Paris Agreement, that is 1.5 degrees of warming. It's probably inevitable that we cross this limit, and many other negative impacts will be upon us. Some of them were mentioned before by other speakers. It's inevitable that if we want to reach carbon neutrality, and IPCC tells us that at the latest it should be by 2050, we don't have any chance of reaching that, again, if we address the military spending. Let me give you my perspective as a Middle European country. So I come from Slovakia. I work in Czech Republic at the Academy of Sciences. It's very troubling for me that I seem to be of quite a few voices in my country and in Slovakia, Czech Republic, that we talk about military. We are currently under the increasing pressure, and I would say we are in the new Cold War. The rhetoric is going in a way that we need more military spending than we had in the past. This is clearly incompatible with climate change targets. One of the so-called progressive parties, political parties in Slovakia, they say we want to reduce emissions, but at the same time they say we want to also increase military spending because we need it for our security. And the rationale for the increased security is because there is a threat by other countries, especially countries to the east, namely China and Russia. And this is every day in the media. I always say people, we need to keep up the critical thinking. We need to go against the mainstream. We need to keep our, our thoughts and spread it whenever and wherever possible. If I may just to make a link to politics, one of the very few positive developments in European perspective is the progressive movement, political movement called DiEM25. It's under the lead of Professor Yanis Varoufakis. And they are one of the very few movements, indeed, maybe only one, that talks about necessity to demilitarize countries. They also go against the ideology of green growth, which was already mentioned as not a sustainable way to continue into the future. And they talk about inequality, about social justice, and also about the freedom of speech. It was, I think, Bina who also said that we are moving away from democracy. It's totally true. We are moving towards less freedom of speech, less of our, ways how to express when we are not, when we think things are not right. So this is clearly the opposite direction we want to go. If I may just finish with a quote from one of the famous, I would say, cases that are now happening, and it's going under the freedom, against the freedom of speech, is the case of Julian Assange, who is a whistleblower and who was showing the world the war crime of powerful countries to the world, and now he's unwanted. They want to just silence him down, as well as to silence the investigative journalism. And he said, if we can start the wars with lies, we can stop them with the truth. And that is, I think, thing we need to go in this direction. And whatever the circumstances, we need to tell the truth and always fight for a more just and peaceful world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander, for showing us that we have to not only limit ourselves to one front, but that there are many fronts which are appearing up, and for that one needs strength and unity. There is an organization which has since many years, decades, always been in the forefront of creating unity also on a political level, which is the World Peace Council. And I'm particularly proud to be able to introduce to you the president of the World Peace Council, Socorro Gomes. I guess you're going to speak in Portuguese.
Thank you.
Eu não ouvi, sou eu? Ok, bem.
You can have the
Bom dia a
English
todos,
translation.
a todas. Agradecer ao companheiro Léo, Gabriel, e a todos por essa oportunidade de compartilharmos ideias, debates e pensarmos nos desafios. Eu queria começar a falar um pouco também, porque não pode deixar de ser, porque essa, de fato, é uma tragédia sanitária que nos aflige a todos e atinge a toda a humanidade, que é a questão da pandemia do Covid-19. É um momento de dificuldade, como vários companheiros já colocaram aqui, com centenas, né? Quase 100 milhões de contagiados, né? Milhões de mortos, e nos assombra, nos impacta muito negativamente e serve também como uma denúncia que é um momento que os povos no mundo inteiro estão buscando uma saída, que é justamente a imunização, uma vacina, né? para sobreviver, para resistir, para ficar imune à Covid, os países mais ricos do mundo concentram 99,9% das vacinas, deixando a humanidade à sua própria sorte ou azar. Vimos nesse período como foram apropriados, praticamente assaltados, né? Os insumos, os equipamentos de proteção, né? Os impedimentos para chegar aos países distantes, né? Essa proteção, inclusive aos profissionais da saúde. Então, demonstra, se nós fizermos um paralelo e uma comparação com a questão dos armamentos, os armamentos hoje, e o grande crescimento já denunciado por vários companheiros que falaram antes, não é? Eles se concentram, se observarmos, somente os Estados Unidos detêm 39% dos gastos em armas no mundo. Então, é um pouco a apropriação para o domínio, assim como com as riquezas, com as vacinas, em tempos de pandemia, os gastos militares, né? Tudo faz parte de um mesmo, vamos dizer, objetivo e de um mesmo caráter da sua natureza, que é o poder, que é a concentração, que é o egoísmo, que é o domínio. Nós observamos, e Cipro tem denunciado, o Instituto de Estocolmo, de Pesquisas para a Paz, não é? Justamente que nesses trilhões de dólares concentram-se onde? É Estados Unidos, é Rússia, é Alemanha, é China, enfim, são poucos os países. E a distância dos Estados Unidos para os outros é abissal. Se olharmos também a OTAN, detém 50% dos investimentos bélicos no mundo. Bom, também tivemos alegrias, os movimentos de paz, os movimentos contra o desarmamento, e dentre eles podemos dizer que o Conselho Mundial da Paz, desde o seu nascedouro, no final da década de 40, é compromisso permanente a luta contra as armas, a luta contra a militarização e as campanhas pela paz, desde o apelo de Estocolmo, buscando eliminar as armas nucleares, onde textualmente o Conselho Mundial da Paz assim afirmava que nenhum país que seria proibido, e essa foi a nossa luta, que qualquer país utilizasse as armas nucleares em primeiro momento, e que estivesse abolidas essas armas, e que fosse criada uma comissão internacional para acompanhar o desarmamento e as eliminações dessas armas, e a eliminação dessas armas. Isto, em que pese tantas décadas, é extremamente atual e continua sendo uma imposição para a nossa sobrevivência, porque observamos Hiroshima e Nagasaki é um chamado, é um apelo, aquele ato de terror contra a humanidade, né? Ali demonstra que nós não podemos conviver com as armas nucleares. Coloca em risco a própria existência da humanidade. Então, companheiro, na última Assembleia do Conselho Mundial da Paz, eu queria dizer aqui que se deu, vamos dizer, para a honra nossa dos brasileiros, no Maranhão, um estado no Brasil, reafirmamos esta questão do compromisso indeclinável e permanente do Conselho Mundial da Paz pela paz e pela abolição das armas de destruição em massa, as armas químicas e especialmente as armas nucleares, né? Então, esta é uma campanha. Portanto, não podemos ficar só aí. Claro, esta é a prioridade. E agora há pouco, inclusive, foi lançado, né, publicamente, foi já acordado, não é, a resolução e o tratado pela eliminação das armas nucleares, e assinado por 50 países. É uma grande luta, e positivo, positivo. Porém, ficamos assim também não tão animados, porque justamente as grandes potências que estão no próprio Conselho de Segurança da ONU não assinaram, os Estados Unidos não assinou, os países mais importantes da União Europeia também não assinaram, não é? Então, isso, vamos dizer, enfraquece de sobremodo esse tratado, o que não quer dizer que devamos ficar parados, devemos continuar a luta, buscar as consciências e compreender, para nós do Conselho Mundial da Paz, e para mim pessoalmente, esta questão do armamento, ela está ligada à busca de poder e à hegemonia. E hoje, se observarmos, não é, nestes últimos momentos, além das armas nucleares, nós temos bases militares esparramadas em todos os continentes. São mais de 800 bases militares. Alguns pesquisadores afirmam que chegam a 1.000, não importa se 800 ou 1.000 bases militares. Isso quer dizer que todos os continentes estão controlados. O nosso continente latino-americano e caribenho tem em torno de 80 bases, tem 76 bases militares, na mais suave das hipóteses, não é? Então, e no resto do mundo, há as frotas da Marinha de Guerra, há o controle espacial e agora o controle comunicacional e as guerras híbridas. Então, há uma busca de controle, e queremos dizer que a maior ameaça à paz de fato, são as armas, mas é o controle da hegemonia que os impérios fazem, inclusive, com os países, seja através, vamos dizer, do terrorismo, estimulando, pagando, seja através das guerras híbridas, com golpes, com o estímulo ao desordamento, à criação do caos dos países, como ocorre no continente, seja com as guerras econômicas, como faz com Cuba, com Venezuela, com outros países, inclusive do Oriente Médio, da Pérsia. Então, para nós, quero dizer que é muito importante estar aqui e vamos agradecer a todos para essa luta. Obrigada, companheiros.
Leo, you have to unmute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for having recalled us once more that there are big powers which we are facing. It is not, peace is not an easy task. It is, we have to face big powers on the other side, which leads us to the political world, the superstructural world. And that's why we have not very frequently, but we have got today the visit of a politician. I don't know whether you are still in the career. Jan Kavan from the Czech Republic, who has been Minister of Foreign Affairs, and as such opposing the coalition, which warmongering coalition with Bush and Blair and so on, and who has been also chairman of the United Nations Assembly in 2002 or 2003. And I'm very glad to be able to ask you the question, if you hear all of these interventions, is there a chance on the political level to make a major breakthrough in the near future? Jan.
Jan, you should unmute.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, I'll be very happy if I have the answer to your question, but it's not so easy. Before I start, let me also reiterate that I was very glad that Alexander mentioned the case of Assange, which I think is very topical, and the civil rights groups all over the world should unite to defend him. However, I think it's obvious to many of us that social and environmental transformation cannot be achieved without peace. And it is impossible to achieve peace without universal disarmament. And we have known for at least last 75 years that the most dangerous weapons are nuclear weapons. So for this reason, I very much welcomed that 2 days ago, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, in short, the nuclear ban treaty, became operational exactly 75 years after the detonations of at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In fact, the treaty was negotiated, as you know, 2017, and it reached ratifications last October with a 90-day delay. I like to stress the word negotiated, because my main argument today is that progress, however large or small, can only be achieved by negotiations, i.e. by diplomacy. Use of force will only throw us back many years, and it will never work. And the use of force with nuclear weapons would be catastrophic for the entire humankind. Democracy, of course, need not be carried out only by professional diplomats. Momentum towards the nuclear ban treaty was led by a few countries, and especially by coalition of civil society groups called the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, which was founded in 2006. Crucial to their success was shifting the debate away from the question of security and deterrence and towards the humanitarian calamities that would result from nuclear conflict. Framing nuclear weapons as a humanitarian problem helped persuade diplomats that the issue concerned their countries directly. The main value, in my opinion, of the treaty is to stigmatize and delegitimize nuclear weapons as instruments of security. It makes clear that the majority of nations do not consider these weapons providing security, quite the opposite. The treaty was fiercely opposed by the United States from the start. In fact, Donald Trump placed enough pressure on 40 countries, including most NATO members and parties to the NPT, to boycott negotiations in 2017 at the UN. Unfortunately, from my point of view, including my own country, the Czech Republic. Nikki Haley, the US ambassador at the time at the UN, made clear that, if I quote her, "We reject any attempt to delegitimize nuclear weapons. We call on our partners and other countries to reflect realistically on the ban treaty's impact," end of quote. Russia, which, as you know, together with the United States, owns more than 90% of all nuclear weapons globally, as well as China, also oppose the treaty. The effort to suppress it have been, however, relatively muted. The threat environment which we now face, marked by tensions with Russia and rapidly rising China, obviously is not conclusive to nuclear disarmament. Hopefully this tension will now decrease, although in my opinion, only very slightly. It seems that the new UN Biden administration will still continue to perceive Russia and China as their enemies. However, the Biden administration is already taking action on nuclear arms control. The White House press secretary confirmed 3 days ago that the US would seek to extend New START agreement with Russia to limit stockpiles that is expiring already on, I think, 5th of February. The Kremlin press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, swiftly told reporters that Russia will also want to extend the pact and is now awaiting the American paperwork. President Biden has also hinted at supporting a no first use policy, meaning the US would pledge not to resort to nuclear bombs unless an enemy did this first. In my opinion, this is important, but however, the US hostility towards the nuclear ban treaty is not likely to change. This first multilateral nuclear disarmament treaty in more than 2 decades was supported fully by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who said it was an important step towards world free of nuclear weapons. According to Guterres, the treaty also represents a strong demonstration of support for multilateral approaches to nuclear disarmament overall. And he stressed that the nuclear weapons is a growing danger and that we will need urgent action to ensure the elimination and to prevent the catastrophe of human and environmental consequences which any use would cause. Let's be clear, there are no safe hands for these unsafe weapons of mass destruction. As I've already mentioned, the success of this treaty owes a lot to civil society groups. We need to acknowledge the great work put in by the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which helped to secure the signatories of 122 countries at the UNGA that made it into a reality. So far, however, the main nuclear weapons of the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, China, and France, these powers have not signed the accord. The treaty clearly declares that countries ratifying it must never under any circumstances develop, test, produce, manufacture, or otherwise acquire, possess, or stockpile nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive device. It seems to me obvious that none of the main nuclear powers will give up their weapons while others will maintain them. And it is extremely difficult to envisage a situation when all the nuclear powers will disarm simultaneously. And I, for one, have a very wild imagination. So we need to come up with another scenario where tensions will be reduced step by step. For example, Wright, the Costa Rican ambassador to the UN, recently expressed frustration with the attitudes of US policymakers and suggested that the treaty could be used as a conversation starter between US, Russia, and China to develop a new security paradigm, not reliant on mutually assured destruction. We cannot underestimate the situation where a number of nuclear powers are embroiled in ongoing conflicts. Let me mention India versus China, Pakistan versus India, North Korea versus non-nuclear South Korea. Nuclear-armed Israel is in ongoing military confrontation, both with Iran and also with Palestinians. And incidentally, just one warmongering president with his finger on the nuclear trigger can easily bring the world to the brink of catastrophe. Donald Trump, who has to my great relief and probably not only to mine, recently left his powerful office. However, he or someone like him can return. And I still remember his threats to attack North Korea and Iran. Fortunately, he stopped in time to listen to his advisor, John Bolton. Addressing the UN General Assembly in September 2017, Trump warned that the United States has great strength and patience, but it is forced to defend itself or its allies. And in that case, he says, we will have no choice but to destroy nuclear-armed North Korea. And following a drone strike, which killed an Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani, a belligerent Trump vowed in early 2020, the US would respond to any Iranian strikes on any Americans or American assets by striking 52 pre-selected sites in Iran. To conclude, let me use Iran as an example how diplomacy can be used to prevent development of nuclear weapons. That was the main purpose of the 2015 agreement, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, which provided Iran with sanctions relief in exchange for curbs on its nuclear activity. Since the Donald Trump administration abandoned the deal in 2018 and reimposed a very crippling economic sanctions, Iranian political scene became more anti-American, the power of Revolutionary Guards have increased, and the current, more reformist government was weakened. In a vain, and I stress vain, attempt to pressure Europeans to help Iran to withstand US sanctions, the Iranian government has gradually violated the terms of the agreement and ramped up nuclear enrichment levels and its stockpile of uranium. Thus, ironically, Trump's policies pushed Iran much closer to acquiring the ability to produce nuclear weapons. With the departure of Donald Trump, there is a chance again given to the diplomats, but under much more difficult circumstances. Following the last Iranian elections, the anti-US atmosphere helped to elect a very conservative Iranian parliament, where a majority of MPs prefer nuclear weapons to the renewal of the JCPOA. President Biden has said that he will re-enter the multilateral pact as a starting point for follow-on negotiations, i.e. if Iran returns to strict compliance under the nuclear pact. Iran's leaders, on the other hand, have indicated that they are ready to return to compliance with the nuclear deal if Washington first lifts Trump-era sanctions. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said last week, if the other side acts honestly and returns to the law and obligations, the problem will be solved very quickly and there will be no legal complexities. So in fact, diplomats here face a major obstacle. US would like to add to the JCPOA entirely new conditions, such as curbs on Iran's missile program and on its support for anti-US regional adversaries, such as Lebanese Hezbollah or the Houthis of Yemen. This is understandably unacceptable to the Iranian government.
Excuse me.
I'll finish now. Neither side can afford to lose face, and time is running out because presidential elections in early 2021, the Iranians will then certainly elect an anti-reformist new president who will have no interest in the renewal of JCPOA. So it remains to be seen if diplomats on both sides, hopefully with the help of European civil rights groups, will prove able to prevent the emergence of yet another nuclear power or another bloody military confrontation in the unstable Middle Eastern environment. Latest news is not encouraging. Biden's new top diplomat Antony Blinken indicated during his Senate hearings that we are, he says, a long ways from Iran meeting its commitments. And at the same time, Iran said it would resume production of uranium metal, a fuel used in nuclear reactors. I continue to remain a cautious optimist and therefore believe that diplomats, with the help of civil rights groups, will be guided by common sense and a desire for peace without the shadow of nuclear weapons. The legacy of Trump's stupid and confrontational policy, I believe, have to be defeated. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Kavan, for sharing all your insights into the upper floors of world politics, which we now analyzed from the ground to the different aspects of what war means and to the reality of international politics, but it's not if I interpret your words, it's not given that the big powers sort of have an insight not to go on like they have been going on all the time. That scenario could become worse if there is not another force which could counteract. And since we are in an open space here of movements, I left to Wright, emblematic figure of the world peace movement. We're sitting in Hawaii at 4 o'clock in the morning to have the final remarks and to answer the question which I from the very beginning had in my mind, what can we do in order to counteract all these different forces which are behind armament, and is there a chance, as you see, being also from the United States, is there a chance for triggering off a bigger movement worldwide? And you have the floor. Unmute.
There we go. Yes, now I'm ready. Yes, thank you very much, Leo, and thank you for the World Social Forum. As you mentioned, I am here in Hawaii, the occupied sovereign nation of Hawaii that the United States has occupied for 123 years, which really lays out exactly what the United States has been doing for over 150 years. And I want to apologize for what my country's been doing. I do have some hopes now that we've had a remarkable change in our leadership of our country. But as Jan mentioned, there are some hazards that we know that are there with the new Biden policies and the people that are going to be implementing them and their history. Eskil, if we could go ahead and start the slide presentation. So here we are in universal disarmament for social and ecological transformation. And how do we go about doing that? Let's go to the next slide. This is a graphic for those of you all who may be on phone. I'll just read this. It's a graphic cartoon with the United States and Uncle Sam holding its nuclear missile laying on a couch for some psychological help. Uncle Sam says, I have 1,800 nuclear missiles, 283 battleships, 9,400 airplanes. I spend more on my military than the next 12 nations combined. And despite spending more every year, I still feel insecure. And then the psychoanalyst says, oh, it's simple. You have a military industrial complex. And that is true. We do in the United States. And as Bina mentioned in her presentation that started us out, many other countries of the world have this military industrial arms complex. Let's go to the next slide, please. What can we do about it? Well, I'm going to be a little ethnocentric in my presentation about what we are doing in terms of not only in the US, but this is translatable to what you all are doing in your countries too. And I think the worldwide movements that we have on social issues, climate issues, Fire Drill Fridays, which is started by, a celebrity, Jane Fonda, who all of a sudden became very interested in climate change and has developed a Friday, every Friday, having presentations. At first, before COVID, it was at the US Congress, and hundreds of people would join every Friday. Since we've had COVID, she now has webinars where over 200,000 people are listening to the presenters that she brings on. Let's go to the next issue that we have in terms of here in the United States. One of the things that has really come to the forefront in this time of COVID has been racial injustice. And we look at racial injustice all around the world and how we can cooperate as international organizations to highlight the issues of racial injustice, where in the US and in many other countries around the world, when George Floyd was brutally murdered by police, there were massive demonstrations in cities, all the cities of the United States and many cities throughout the world. And let's go on to the next slide. Not only on the racial issues, but we have the issue of environmental issues, water, the pipeline protests and oil protests. The Biden administration is, of course, in its first 3 days of being in office, has done a lot of things. One is rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. So another one is working, saying that they'll work with the Russians on the New START. And also the Biden administration has canceled the XL pipeline. And now we are working as national coalitions to try to get them to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. And when we look at your countries, and you're all over the world, what you are doing in trying to protect water, trying to protect the environment from these things. Let's go on to the next slide. And that says working in coalitions. With in the US and particularly the Sunrise Movement, a movement of young people who have really started moving. And then, as I mentioned, the Jane Fonda, see if we can get celebrities to help us with this. It's their world too. Let's go on to the next slide too, please. And I would like to put in a plug for us all to think about education. The education that we do for our communities and the adult communities, the workshops and the seminars, of which we probably are all very, very tired now, because with Zoom, we have really been able to connect the movements all over the world, where here the World Social Forum is, rather than being in Mexico, which we all would have loved to have gone to Mexico, but being on Zoom with everyone in the world now able to access all of the remarkable programs that are being done in these days here in Zoom at the World Social Forum, and all of the other organizations that have had remarkable presentations from the grassroots all the way up to the various considered experts. And then bringing it down one level more, though, is how do we get the youth of our countries to move on this? Art, music, spoken word competitions for even the very small kids, the elementary school kids, all the way up through the high school and then the college. It is really our mission to to get the younger generation to come along to help with this, because we probably 90% of the people that are on these World Social Forum webinars are over, let's just put it charitably, over 50. And I would say it's probably a lot older than that. So we need the youth to be coming on. Let's go on to the next slide. And on that, I just want to mention a very unique thing that probably you have in your countries, but if not, this is something to consider as a social justice program to try to, as the training of future generations. I'm just going to mention one particular group here in the US that has, under the radar, done some remarkable training for future generations. And it's called the National Hispanic Institute. They start in high school and have leadership opportunities beginning in junior high school and all the way up through high school of training young Latinx students on how to advocate for issues, how to be assertive in issues. And let's go on to the next slide. And it's produced some remarkable people in a short amount of time. This young lady, Lena Hidalgo, and let's go on to the next slide. She is now the county judge, the chief administrator of the 4th largest city in the United States. She was elected at age 27, just 2.5 years ago, to head Harris County, Texas, which encompasses Houston and the area around it. She was an immigrant from Colombia, arrived in the US at age 15, started attending the National Hispanic Institute, and from there was able to get some scholarships, going on to Stanford and a master's at Harvard. And now she's heading the 4th largest community in the United States. And another person that comes out of this type of educational institution, let's go on to the next slide, is a person that you probably will recognize very well, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has been a firebrand in the US Congress on many issues, on the climate, on every social justice issue. Let's go on to the next slide. She was elected to Congress at age 29, just 2.5 years ago. She attended this institute, and the institute trained her to say, we're not afraid to fall on our face. Sometimes we have to take a stand, people respond and start a conversation. One of the mentors in this says she's not afraid of anyone. She's just as confident back then when she was in this institute as she is now. So these are the types of people that we can train if we get them into the right training processes. And I know I'm talking about politicians, and sometimes we don't like to, it's the politicians that have gotten us into some of these things, but it's the politicians that also, if we get the right people in there, that can help us out. And let's go on to the next slide. And that I'll just kind of end right here, because we have some women legislators who now represent the breadth of America, the ethnic and racial diversity that is in the United States, who are now in the US Congress, not in the numbers we need yet, but through institutes like the National Hispanic Institute and other social justice programs, we are now getting some people in who can really start affecting some changes for us. So I would say, as a global peace and social justice movement, we really need to focus in on training the young people, on educating them so well that they become consumed with the need to help keep our world, get our world really in a much better place. And I'll just end by saying, thank you so much to the International Peace Bureau, the World Peace Council, the World Social Forum, for all of your leadership and bringing together us from all over the world so that we can get together, so that we can talk and exchange ideas. And we will make this world a much better place. And we hopefully will figure out a way that we can get those 9 nuclear nations, including the United States, to give up those weapons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne, for this input geared towards future generations and the education of the present generations also. And I find even all this 1 hour and a half we have been through was a big educational process. I find also that the peace movement, which I have been following all the years through, has made a big step forward by not only saying we are against war, but for pinpointing down that disarmament is the problem. Armament is the problem and disarmament is the solution. The question is, how are we going to do it? Bringing together, like this panel discussion has shown, the different levels of society. There were scientists, there were grassroots organizers, there were diplomats, there were, and we all came in sort of the same conclusion and the same that we have to enlarge our world in the sense that we have to give more attention, perhaps than to the past, to the other movements. And we can include the other movements, not in a paternalistic way, but in a way that we all understand that if the ecology movement says, for instance, save the planet, we are also saying save the planet, because with nuclear arms and weapons of mass destruction, and this is going to be an eruption of the planet and an annihilation of the planet, and also facing the big economic, like Owen has said, what is missing in these days, that could be a building ground for many people who are going on the streets because they are facing hunger and they are facing economic unemployment and so on. All that somehow falls into its ground, and if we capture this, I think we can forward that. And let's use this last 20 minutes we have to ask around if you have any ideas about how to do it. Now that we agree on common objectives, perhaps even on strategy that should be followed on different levels of politics and society, but how can we do it? Do you have any idea? Are there any plans, also concrete plans in the next future, where we can call the World Social Forum to get there and to really push the question, or any other idea you have? The floor is open to everybody. You know how this works with raising the hands.
In the bottom, there is a button.
Participant, I see some
reactions, and there, if you click on this reactions, you can raise your hand.
I see one hand raised, Sandra Rivera Colon. Go ahead.
Hi, Yo soy Tara Colón de la gente pobre de los
No
Human
se
Rights
oye,
Campaign.
no se oye muy bien.
No se oye.
Ahora, manténgase
escucha?
en esta distancia, sí, puede ser.
Quería comentar que estaban hablando de las diferentes, pero nadie habló de las comunidades pobres, que hay que educar allá, porque somos las que ellos piden a ir somos los soldados. Ellos no van para los vecindarios donde la economía está estable, ellos van para los vecindarios donde la economía no está estable, donde la gente tiene, y ahí es que ellos reclutan los soldados para la guerra. Hay que empezar a ir, ninguna otra persona quiere ir a organizar y educar a nuestros jóvenes en nuestros vecindarios. Si aquí en los Estados Unidos, en otros países, nosotros somos como quien dice la leña que ellos echan al fuego para morirnos. Nosotros somos los que necesitamos que nos eduquen. ¿Por qué? Porque la guerra está el medio ambiente, como nosotros como comunidades pobres, como nosotros podemos organizar y hacer y necesita el dinero. La comunidad pobre necesita el dinero para organizar nosotros mismos. Y hay que tienen dinero para ir a hacer proyectos. Nosotros también necesitamos que hablen de cómo nosotros vamos a buscar recursos para los vecindarios más pobres, poder educar y organizar allá.
Yeah, everybody understood we need the resources in order for this educational process.
Would you like me to say that in English?
It's already been.
I thought there was translation.
It was translation. We got it in English as well. So that's all good. Thank you.
Would you like me to say it in English as well?
No, that's okay.
Yeah. By the way, what Sandra Rivera tells, we have sort of manifested in a video which has been shown yesterday, which is done with a big emotional impact and saying that we are not giving our sons to the warmongers. That is the message, and you can look at it in the World Social Forum web page. It's a very, very beautiful video, also with a larger interview with Noam Chomsky. Matthias.
Hello, everybody. I enjoyed this discussion. And what to do, I would suggest that in the region, in the different regions of the world, we need to get together to make a mini World Social Forum, regional social forums, discussing all these things, what is going on here, and how to join our forces. What I would suggest you, and this proposal was made about a month ago, that here in Hungary, we have the possibility to give a place for about 80, 90 persons to come here and to have discussions, social forum discussions. So in September, hopefully the pandemic is over, I would like to invite people from the Central and Eastern European to make our forum either here in Budapest or near Budapest on an island, which is a traditional island for people trying to work together to make a step forward, how to solve these problems, what we were talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. I know this event in Horani is very beautiful there, and the people of common spirits get together in a leisurely way of discussing, and there have been born some new ideas there. Elsa Rasbach. Elsa?
Hello, yes, I'm Elsa Rosbach. I'm an American living in Germany and a co-founder of our Broad Network drone campaign. And I wanted to say that I feel that disarmament may go partly weapon by weapon, just as we are mentioning with atomic weapons and how they go. And I would like to put as next on the list the issue of armed drones and armed robots, autonomous weapons, as a weapon that needs to be banned. And I wanted to say that although there's been an unfortunate, very rapid increase in proliferation of this weapon, so that smaller countries can purchase armed drones and purchase them from China and other places, the fact is that we have also some chances of making progress against this weapon, eventually through international negotiations, starting with Germany, which has now for more than 11 years debated on whether to arm drones due to ethical and legal considerations. And just in December 16th, we won again that the SPD did not agree to arm drones. For the time being, yes, and that this has been a signal that is of some hope. And we consider that we need to continue further with this approach, which was a grassroots organizing approach combined with a lobbying approach, and that we wish to spin into an international type of agreement, of negotiations that would begin with, of course, some of the weapons that Germany is engaged in with other European countries, such as the Oro drone in partnership with France, Spain, and Italy, and also the Future Combat Air System in collaboration with France. I wanted to say about drones just briefly that they are basically conceived from the beginning as an asymmetrical weapon for aggression, have been used up to date only against brown and black people by majority white nations, except perhaps you could say the recent conflict in of Azerbaijan and Armenia, where some are drawing the conclusion because of the outcome of that war that everyone needs armed drones. But equally, the conclusion could be that until they are banned, everyone needs good air defense against drones, which is far less expensive than armed drones and could even be obtained by non-state actors equally as armed drones. So we are hoping that you'll just be open in the World Social Forum to also work on this weapon, if we are able to make some further headway in Europe. And we are dismayed that Biden, however, took Avril Haines as his Minister of Security, who designed the Obama drone program that led to tenfold more drone use than Bush had used, and to justify illegal killings. And she also has a proponent of torture. So on this arena, we are a little concerned about the direction of the Biden administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have Bina and Reiner, and with that, I think we are reaching pretty soon an end.
Leo, you hear me? Hello, Leo.
I have no other.
I have Leo. You hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
I raised my hand long time.
But not on the. Okay.
Leo, maybe for clarification, also Reiner raised his hand, and I think Bina.
Yes, Bina and Reiner I registered, but
in el chat hay preguntas.
It's okay. It's okay. Bina, ladies first.
Very quickly, it's just to respond to actually Elsa's point. Elsa, there is a campaign to ban killer robots. And this is a very important point. I can keep put you in touch with Mary Warehams, who is in charge of that. She's based in Washington, D.C., but she's from New Zealand. So we can, I can keep you in touch with that. The important point you've raised is on the issue of not just drones. I come from South Asia, where in Afghanistan, United States bombed 7,000 times Afghanistan with drones, armed drones. So it's a huge issue, and India and Japan and India and Israel and India and United States. So the whole issue of not just drones, but artificial intelligence. The only question that I want to say is, which I've repeated, is we cannot have silos. We cannot do weapon by weapon, you know. That's what we're saying. It has to be a holistic approach towards universal disarmament. Otherwise, the disarmament movement has succeeded 50%, but not succeeded the other 50% because it has been so siloed. And I think with the world social movement and the peace movements, we can converge that. But one by one is not a solution, I would like to say. And I think other people want to speak, but I think the critical point is to be able to have a holistic campaign where it should not be project-based. It should be a commitment of lifetime of many of us, because it's going to take years. Thank you.
Very important what you just said. Henning, and to wrap it up, Reiner.
Yes. Hello, you can hear me?
Yes.
I have no picture. Okay. You can hear me. It's okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
very short. Greetings to Leo. The last time we saw us on Lesbos, and this is my subject. What we miss sometimes to speak about the refugees, who are the results of all the war, the regime change, the weapons, the military bases, because now more than 80 million refugees are running around the world, but we have not a discussion with a link that we destroy these countries before, and then we have the big problem in every country, and we have a bad behavior to the refugees, but we are responsible because our budget and all our investigation in this military politics, foreign politics, make it. So when we speak about movement, it makes sense also to bring the link not only to the environment movement, although a strong refugee movement, and especially to show that we are responsible for the refugee with our politics. This only I want to add, that we also bring this a few inside our movement, that we have to make the link to the refugee question. Thank you.
It's an important point. I want to announce that right after this webinar, there is another webinar with the migrants movements, especially in Latin America, but also with the Greek participant. And we try to also make this linkage in the overarching concept of universal disarmament. Reiner. Now, muted.
I want to add one point to the holistic approach. I think it will not work to discuss weapons to weapons or disarmament of one weapon to the next weapon. We can only discuss disarmament as a whole process. But the same is, we cannot discuss the climate change, and we cannot discuss social justice as single points. We always have to discuss them together. The holistic approach is that we will either successful in all these 3 points and others in the direction of big transformation, or we will not be successful. Because all these big challenges are deeply connected. On one side by the victims, on the other side but also by the responsible persons for the problem. So when we want to overcome the problems, we have to connect these points. And this brings me to some ideas which was discussed in the chat, I think, very intensively during the last hours. How we can realize, or how we can go a step forward. Not only describing the problems or saying that we need a transformation. And from my point of view, we should do 3 things. The first is very easy. We should discuss these topics. And we should discuss these holistically, what we have not done in the past. We discuss environmental question, peace question, but not together. So we have to discuss this. Second, we have to discuss a strategy what could be the next steps, what is the weakest point by our opponents, how we can get successes. And I think above all, we have to discuss the relation between climate movement and climate change and peace activities and peace actions. We need much more common activities. And the third point is coalition building. We have to overcome old threats and overcome old problems. We have to develop much more united activities and actions. And for me, the start of the World Social Forum yesterday and today, the discussion is a brilliant start point for developing common activities of all social movements for big transformation. And when this could be part of the discussion for the next days, I think we will definitely go big steps forward.
Leo, hay algunas descripciones que están en el chat y Félix pidió la palabra y yo también, por favor.
Muted. Leo, you are muted. Please unmute.
Yes, if you can make your intervention short because we are already reaching the end of the Mirek.
Only to say that I'd like to make my point around the connection between the disarmament as a global issue together with the question of the disarmament on the national levels. I mean, all the policies that are linked with security, public security policies that are the basics for any kind of position of the countries in relation to a global statement on disarmament, because all the public security issues now are linked with the global agendas of the fight against terror, fight against drugs, and this complexity must be considered. Thank you.
Yes, Mirek?
So, if we need to make the link between the global and the national disarmament, it's necessary, as Jan Kavan already mentioned, about the ban on nuclear weapons, also to combine our efforts from above and diplomatic efforts with the pressure from the ground, from the bottom up, in order to negotiate that every country will keep its military expenditures under 1% of the gross domestic product, GDP. This means the same as you show the other people, the other nations. I have my hand empty. I don't have a stone in it to beat you down. So it's a long-term process, but we should set such an aim, a goal in a long-term perspective to achieve disarmament in the national budgets under 1%. Then the wars will stop again, not suddenly, but in a long-term process.
Okay. Magde Luis? Not here. Bahram?
Yes, thank you. I'm in the USA working with Green Party US, but I'm a native of Iran and wanted to make a comment about the discourse that we always hear trying to control Iran's nuclear energy or weapons program. It's very one-sided because why would Iran need nuclear weapon? It would be as a deterrent to Israel's already 300 or more nuclear weapons. Nobody mentions that. And it's always, everything is against Iran. Why is that so one-sided? Everybody should be denuclearized, but if one has, then the others should have to, as a deterrent. It's a very normal situation, and everybody would understand it. Thank you.
Thank you. So Magde Luis is not here, so we wrap it up, and I want to thank all the speakers who intervened up until now, particularly also the team of thank team of IPP who was preparing everything marvelously, and the interpreters who really did a fine job. Thank you very much, and please come to this weekend to one of the assemblies. You will find announced virtual assemblies where we take some decisions, and perhaps we take a decision on how to agree on universal disarmament. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.